Hey, we want to welcome everybody to the Exponential webinar. It is great to have you with us. We're going to have a terrific, probably next 45 minutes, 50 minutes or so together. And I'm really excited about the conversation and the person I'm getting a chance to talk to. Our guest today, and it's not really a guest because Ed is a part of the Exponential team. But a little bit about him, if you don't know, PhD and Dean and Professor of Leadership and Christian Ministry at Talbot School of Theology in Biola. He also serves as a distinguished visiting scholar at Oxford University, is a regional director for Lausanne, North America, editor-in-chief of Outreach Magazine, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And generally speaking, I enjoy him immensely. He's just a good dude. So Ed, thank you very much for joining us. And I'll tell you, before we jump in, we're going to have a conversation, and it's going to really be around the current state of kind of multiplication in the U.S., talk some about the 16% mission, talk about some other bigger picture things that probably nobody else like Ed has a perspective on from a national perspective of what's happening in faith. But also we want to give you a chance to kind of interact with us. If you have questions, this is really kind of your opportunity to ask questions, really interact with particularly Ed on these topics. So you see the Q&A button down there in the corner. If you just drop questions in there as we're presenting material, we'd be glad to take some of those and really respond, because more than anything else, and we're going to take this from kind of here's what's currently going on, and you're really going to get Ed's take on what does that mean for us as followers of Jesus in this current cultural moment. But if you have your own questions, but okay, what does that mean for me as a church leader, as a church planter, as a person who's a practitioner? What does it mean for me? Yeah, drop those in there. We'd love to interact with you on those. So anyway, glad to have everybody here. How you doing, Ed?
Good. Let me remind everyone, because the questions are already coming in. Is this being recorded? The answer is this being recorded is yes. And if anyone asks the question if this is being recorded, we're going to block you, because it always you get 50 people asking that. I'm just kidding. We love everybody. We don't block anybody. But Dave, it's good to see you. And the next time I'm going to see you, you're going to be lecturing with us at Oxford University. And we're excited about you coming to teach at Wycliffe Hall at Oxford and teaching both our Talbot students.
As you're well aware, it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Yeah.
And that is why I'm
Dave,
here to do that.
Dave, you're a humble man, but also I would tell you that Exponential, I mean, I knew you before you were cool, and Exponential has become the go-to place for conversations and encouragement around church planning and multiplication and more. So I'm excited to bring you to our class. We do this class. If you're a Talbot student, you can come take courses with me at Oxford, or if you're an Oxford student. And so I love bringing Dave in. It's going to be a great week. And we're going to C.S. Lewis's house. Your wife has been
No.
working. She's your fun planner, and so we're looking forward to going to C.S. Lewis's house, doing a tour, some other stuff as well, which we do
Yeah.
with our Talbot students as well. So you'll be with some of our Talbot students while you're there.
And that'll be a first for me. So yeah, I'm excited about that.
You're not far from the kingdom. You can still come with me and do more programs at Talbot.
I'm working my way in that direction. Don't count me out.
All right, I like it.
Hey, let's get to some of the good stuff we've been talking about.
Yeah.
You got an article, I think, coming out in USA Today sometime this week, and it's about some of the data, and some of you actually presented just 3 weeks ago at Exponential. So let's do this kind of where you think it's necessary. Back up and give us some of the highlights from that, kind of as a refresher for those that were there and for those that weren't there. So you go, oh, I'm glad to hear that. Didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Thank you. And then also, I think there's some things we were talking about that you've kind of learned since then that'll be interesting to people.
Yeah, so almost everything that I talked about Exponential. Matter of fact, if you read the USA Today article, it comes out Good Friday at some point. If you read the USA Today article and you are at Exponential, you're going to be like, Ed Stetzer just wrote his Exponential talk as the USA Today article, and it's functionally true. And it's something's going on in the data. So remember, I kept saying something's going on in the data. That was kind of my hook. That's literally what's in the article. Something's going on in the data and in our culture is what I try to explain. So if you weren't at Exponential, first of all, why not? But if you weren't at Exponential, we talked about, my talk was on the state of the church and church planting. So this is actually the very presentation that I gave from the main stage. And I really started with the idea that it's a real cultural opportunity for us. A wide door for effective ministry is open for me. But then the rest of that verse says, yet many oppose me. There are challenges and opportunities that are here for us right now that I really want us to to kind of unpack a little bit here in this webinar, and then we'll take your questions as well. I'm excited about taking your questions, actually. So let me kind of say a little bit that the big picture here, and this has been part of something called the State of the Church. So this is a research project where our friends at Barna and Glue have been doing, and I'm a part of. I'm actually doing a road tour, believe it or not. I am in a Sprinter van next week, and Don and I are driving to San Francisco, speaking at an event in San Francisco, and
Okay,
driving a
quick
Sprinter van.
sidebar. How much time are you actually spending in that van?
Dude, we're like camping in the van. How do you doubt the? It's so we're gonna
Is
go spend the
Donna
night.
is Donna with you?
Yes, we're going to Big Sur. We're camping the night, and we're doing video. I mean, within reason, we're doing video in the van. And because here's the thing. Here's the thing. You're in Chicago. It's freezing all the time. I love Chicago, but it's cold. We got to remind people because people need to choose where they go to school. I got to remind them California is awesome. So come out here, Talbot School of Theology. Even if you're like afraid of California, because some of you are kind of wimps about California, come for study. Anyway, so we're driving the Sprinter van up, staying the night at Big Sur, then going up to speak at San Francisco with Transforming the Bay for Christ.
Cool.
So it'll be
Okay.
super fun. Anyway, so yes, I really am staying in the van. Anyway, moving on. Don't interrupt me with irrelevant questions.
I just need to fact check you from time to
It
time.
was fact check. I don't mind a good fact check. Okay, so we've been doing this thing on State of the Church, and I'm presenting these things at the Biola Lead the Way tour. That's the van. The point is, I'm driving a van around presenting at these conferences. So, and the big picture is decline, 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 and really, like don't think that it's everything's going great. It's not. The big narrative, the big picture for the last 30 years is the decline of religion in America. Actually, probably for the last 40 years, like about 1% per year lately, less identifying as Christian. And we can see this. We can see this in church attendance, right? So you can kind of see here, look at this slope this slope of decline 48% to 27%. Now, again, I'm going to talk about this, but stay with me. This is the big picture because all people want to focus on is this. And that's a year. A year is not a trend. This is the trend. Decline, decline, decline. Right. So this is the trend. 85 to 66. 20% less people call themselves Christian than did in 2008. And we all know that people who call themselves Christians aren't necessarily followers of Jesus. Importance of religious faith, decline, decline. That is now again, I know what you're seeing. I'm seeing it too. I talked to something's going on in the data. That's the article coming at USA Today. That's the phrase I used at Exponential. But this is
Mhm.
the big story is that about 1% per year less people say that they're Christians every year. Yes, stay with me, but 1% less. So the big story is the narrative of decline. And I have to say that because, Christians, they love Jesus. They're always sort of encouraging and they want to look at the best of things, but you have to acknowledge that the big story of religion in America today is that it is declining. And so that's kind of the what I kind of presented there at Exponential. By the way, some of you are probably looking at the slides, and you feel free to screenshot them as well. But the biggest shift in religion is the percentage of people opting out altogether. That is the big story, and I don't want you to miss that. That's the big story, and particularly, by the way, we're going to see among young women, as well. Female young adults lead among Gen Z nuns. Matt Ryder's asking the questions: how much overlap will this have with Exponential? My pastor boss wants me to hear these talks. This is going to be a lot of overlap between the two. We're starting with, but I got some new data too that I want to put in here as well. But female young adults are leading the way. But this is the picture. Like I put this map up at Exponential. I felt a little bad because there's so many non-Americans there at Exponential. It's a global conversation, a global movement. But my assignment was to talk about the state of church here, and the research is about here. But look at the shift. I mean, it's a stunning shift of the people who are the nuns. Nuns are people who have no religious affiliation in the from 2008 to 2022. I mean, basically, the nuns were concentrated on the West Coast and in the Northeast. Now it's the country, right? So that's facts. Facts are our friends. Don't be afraid of facts. Listen, I know Jesus wins. I've read the end of the book. I know his victory's coming. But the big picture is a picture of decline. But something is going on in the data and our culture. So one of the things I did is I tried to explain this in terms of the gravitational pull of the secularized world. So then again, that's part of the USA Today article. Is I'm assuming. I mean, it's supposed to be published this weekend, but if it doesn't, then I'll you'll find it eventually somewhere. But again, they've already sent back the edit. But I tried to explain that every year it's like a satellite kind of revolving around the Earth, and it gets closer and closer. There's a gravitational pull that's there, and that's been the case. So the secularism has an exerting influence 1% per year. Now, in the USA Today article, I actually say in there that, but something has changed, and something's even changed in the UK. So, Dave, you're going to be there. I think you'll be there the day I talk about this. There's a brand new research project out of the UK that is shocking. It's shocking some of the numbers that we're seeing out of the UK. But here's what I looked at in the American data.
Are you referencing the Jesus Speaks
No,
research?
no, 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 no. It's just a
No.
few days old. It's out of their Bible
I'll go back
Society,
then. All
and
right,
it's
go for it.
published with it's in partnership with YouGov, so it's a legitimate polling organization, and they called it they're calling the article is called "The Quiet Revival" is what they were calling it, because and it's fascinating to see how much this has changed. Let me give you an example. Um, the when church attendance among young adults, right? Pretty striking considering secularism. First of all, they found what we found is for the first time in the religion research, more young men than young women are going to church, which is really, really significant and fascinating. But and again, I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. But I don't want you to miss this too. Let me read from the report. It says the quiet revival shows the most dramatic church growth is among young adults, particularly young men. In 2018, just 4% of 18 to 24-year-olds said they attended church at least monthly. Today, that's risen to 16%, with young men increasing from 4% to 21%, and young women from 3 to 12%. I didn't mention this at Exponential, but this is really shocking news. Now, again, it's really important that you be careful. Whenever there's shocking news, first of all, you want to check the source. Right? There's a lot of bad stats out there. So YouGov is a legitimate polling organization. The Bible Society sponsored it, so you should be, I don't know the right word where it's not suspicious, but whenever a Christian organization, keep in mind that Dave and I lead Christian organizations, but when a religious organization sponsors a poll, you want to ask, well, are the questions legit? And so I looked into the poll. I feel comfortable about it. Again, I put it in USA Today. So that's a pretty shocking growth in church attendance and young adult church attendance in the UK, and it's all the buzz in the UK. But here's the thing you need to know: the UK leads the US as a religious kind of early barometer. So when the UK religions declined, it's probably 10, 15 years ahead of the decline of American religion. The big story in the UK, decline, decline, decline. So even this growth doesn't put it back to where it was 30 years ago, but there's something going on in the data. So we looked at Exponential, we looked at 6 changes since 2020. I said the
Hey, Ed,
meteor hit.
I got a quick theory I want to throw at you on
Oh,
that one.
please, I'm all ears.
I I was in London. I heard the exact same thing. I was totally blown away by it. And part of me wonders if, okay, so what is it possible that what we have there in London? I agree with you're right. Like they're always 10 to 15 years ahead of us
Yep.
in culture. Is it possible that what you have is you have a generation of people who have nothing to deconstruct because they've never been to church. They
Yeah.
have no church hurt because they never were in church and are desperately looking for all kinds of solutions. And now church or Jesus or faith is becoming an option where, here in the States, some young people are still kind of dealing with the aftermath of unpleasant experiences in church.
Yeah, no question. So, I mean, the big picture in the UK is that we're sort of in this place. We're in a weird place. America religiously is a weird place. It's like Ireland and Poland in some ways. It's stayed disproportionately religious when the rest of the world secularized at a much faster, rest of the Western world secularized at a much faster level. So, so like people think of this as a Christian nation. Even non-Christians say, well, if you're Jewish, this is a Christian nation. If you're Hindu, this is a Christian nation. Now, we don't think of it that way. I mean, most evangelicals don't, because it's like, most people aren't really committed to Christ in the way that we would want someone to be born again, changed by the power of the gospel, living as a disciple. So the UK is 2, 3 generations away from, like, a lot of people today, like your age and my age, our peers their parents probably went to church. But then for
Mhm.
my kids, a lot of their friends never went to church. But for the UK, they might be 2 or 3 generations away from that. So you have less baggage. But what's interesting is the Church of England has been embroiled in a. I mean, the Archbishop of Canterbury just resigned over
Yeah.
his just. I'm trying to use probably the proper term, over the handling of some allegation, the mishandling of some allegations. So the this is like even in the midst of this. So, but I do think Europe is increasingly pre-Christian, where we're still. I don't even know we can say we're post-Christian. It's hard to say you're post-Christian when 70% plus of the people in the country say that they're Christians, even though we don't necessarily use the term in the same way. Okay, so 6 changes since 2020, and then I'm not going to represent everything here. I'm trying to just get the big picture things, and we'll go to your questions, Dave, and everyone else's. So Gen Z men engaging church at a higher level. And a higher level. This is really important that you don't miss this. Let me come back a couple of slides to show you this graphically. This is religious attendance by gender and birth year, and I want you to look at this. Right. So if your mom or grandparents were born in the 1940s, women go to church way more than men. Look at that. 40, what is that? 42.5% of women go to church weekly who were born in 1940. But it's a lot lower with men, a lot lower if you're born here. If you're born in the 60s, that's going to be Dave and I, right? So a lot more women than men. And if you're born in the 80s, still more women than men. And then if you were born in 2000, look at the difference between men and women. That's unheard of in religion research. And by the way, the National Church Life Survey in Australia, Dave, I forget the wonderful leader of that. You know who she is. I can't remember her name. Um,
It's
uh,
escaping me.
yeah,
Sorry.
but so same thing they're finding in Australia that young men now are more higher than women. Same thing they're seeing in the UK. Something's going on. Now, here's the thing. There's a crisis in young men. Like Ruth in NCLS. I can't remember her last name. So, but there's a crisis in young men around the world. Now, I'm not saying there's a revival in young men. I think a lot of more young men are being influenced by Andrew Tate than the gospel of Jesus Christ, and I want that to change. Okay, but back to here. So back to the chart. So the never attends. Look at the shift. This is a very big. If it wasn't just a never-ending parade of crazy on the news in America right now, this would be on the front page. But it's not because everything else is crazy. Okay, so Gen Z men. I'm going quickly. You can listen on slow speed when you rewatch this. Gen Z men, Gen Z teens, more open
I'll tell
than
you what,
any.
real quick, Ed.
Yeah.
I am gonna jump in because one of our people on here had a question about that. They said this in their kind of a thesis on why more men than women. Could it be that there are less women because there is less representation of women in leadership in many denominations? She says, thankfully, that's not the case in my denomination. But then she also goes on and says, this is Christine. Also, does your research ask questions to those Gen Z women if they feel safe in churches? With so many difficult situations we've seen, maybe there could be a correlation to that.
Yeah, yeah. I read a good thing to answer. Christine, thank you for your question. Um, in America today, 2 out of 3 women who regularly attend church go to churches that don't ordain women. So it is the vast majority position. And so could it be that having not seen high representation, that young women are more likely to drop out of church? And so I would say, because Dave, we serve a broad audience at Exponential. We have complementarians and egalitarians, and again, we kind of recognize that people have searched the Bible for a long time, and they can love the Bible, love Jesus, and come to some different conclusions on this issue. So again, but I think it is fair to say, and Christine has rightfully asked. Now it sounds like Christine goes to an egalitarian denomination, but it is right to ask, and I think the answer is that yes, the lack of female representation is probably a factor and I think complementarian denominations can elevate female voices as well, women voices as well, and have, and they've done, and we see that. Keep in mind that Beth Moore, who was Southern Baptist and everyone made the big news when she left Southern Baptist Convention to become an Anglican, the church she goes to is a complementarian church. So I think Beth Moore's got a pretty widely embraced and known voice. and yet she's within two different denominational traditions, both of whom would be among the 2 out of 3 that don't ordain women as pastors. So, but I do think it's fair to say that is an issue. Christine says she pastors with the Assemblies of God, represent Assemblies of God. Christine, I'm looking forward to being at after Dave and I are in Oxford together. I'm headed off to be with Assemblies of God and others in Helsinki for the Pentecostal World Fellowship. So maybe I'll see you and some friends there. Okay, so, but back to your question at hand. I think too, we have to acknowledge that young men are becoming more conservative ideologically and young women are becoming more progressive ideologically. So it's not just a Christian, non-Christian thing. It is there's a split, there's a forking in culture going on right now. In some places like South Korea, it's a stunning thing. Young men are becoming much more conservative, young women much more progressive, and it's impacting marriage rates and fertility rates. I mean, South Korea is in some demographic collapse. And so in America, we see this as well. We're seeing young men becoming more conservative, young women becoming more progressive. And I'm not saying that, and don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that being progressive always means you're less religious, but overwhelmingly there's a statistical correlation. So if you are progressive politically and culturally, you're almost always, not always, and African Americans often diverge on this statistically, but you're almost always less religious. And if you're more conservative culturally, ideologically, even politically, you tend to be more religious. So that may be, women saying, you know what, I'm concerned about issues of, maybe sexuality, issues of abortion or other things as well. So I think it's multifaceted, but I think to answer your question, yes, I think that's part of it as well. So okay,
Oh, good
so
stuff.
you want to move on, or what do you want to do, Dave?
Yeah, let's keep going. That's great. I want to hear the six.
Okay, cool. All right, so just kind of walking through. So Gen Z teens more open than prior generations, and we're actually seeing the high and higher among young men than young women. I would add to that the plateau of the nuns. This is like, again, if it wasn't a never ending parade of crazy on the news every day, this would be a big story. So the Pew Research people, they're the ones who came up with the phrase the rise of the nuns that most of us know now. And the rise of the nuns are the nuns, or the NONES, the none of the aboves, who, when filling out a religious survey, say nothing. And 1% per year for 30 years. And now it seemed to have stopped. Now, don't misunderstand. It hasn't reversed, but it has stopped. Have we reached the bottom of the decline? We don't know. There's actually some indication that there might be some forward positive possibilities, but Pew is very well respected. Let me be crystal clear that if Pew says something, Ed Stetzer tends to believe it. And matter of fact, one time they said something that I said, "Hey, I'm not sure you guys asked that question rightly," and they actually like re-ask the question. So these people are pros. And what they're saying is it's plateaued, and there's still some possibility of continued decline because of younger generations being less religious. But it's a very 30-year trends. When 30-year trends end, it's very big news. It should be on the front page. If the world was just, this would be on the front page of CNN. Diverse traditions are experiencing the current moment differently. I don't know what percentage of our viewers today are African American, but if you're African American, your experience after COVID in your church is very different than predominantly Anglo churches, Asian, Latino, multicultural churches. For example, if you're come with me to LA, to our LA African American megachurches, most of them are maybe around half the size of what they were before COVID in attendance, but they're online. So African American churches now have a higher, this is from the Hartford Institute, Scott Thumma, our mutual friend. African American churches now have the highest online engagement of any ethnic racial grouping in our research, and their research, which is fascinating, but also lower in-person attendance, but the giving has often remained. It's 2020 forward has just been a bizarre time with differences in practice still being figured out. Increase in Bible sales, fascinating increase in Bible sales. Wall Street Journal reported on this. Let me add something that this is from my Exponential talk. So the American Bible Society just released their State of the Bible report. John Plake, John will be speaking with me at some of our Lead the Way tour stops. We're going to get him in the van. We got to get you in the van. Dave, we got the van wired up with cameras like comedians in cars doing coffee. We got to get you in the van and do an interview. But
Hey,
then I got to drive.
you do know that Exponential like 10 years ago did this and had a van.
I'm very aware. I believe that might have been where I got the name. I mean, I got the idea. I call it the Talbotron 3000, but I loved your van. I was in your van, but you didn't have the full, like we got 4 cameras. I mean, that was
Oh, no,
before.
no. We Exponential, we did it on the cheap.
Yeah. Well, Talbot does it on the cheap too. But, it's a big thing now to get, like, I'm driving around cities. Like, I'm going to be in San Francisco with the Transforming the Bay people and Gary, who leads that, or he's going to be sitting in the van driving around San Francisco talking. It's going to be super fun. Anyway,
Awesome.
so, so the American Bible Society finds increases in Bible reading at almost every level and disproportionately among young men. Disproportionately among young men. It's something going on in the data and in our culture. And a lot of people are changing churches still, right? So, we're just finishing up the Outreach 100, where we're looking at the fastest growing and the largest churches. And there's a lot of shifting still going on in our culture. So all that to say, I know we got some questions coming in, so we can get to those. But there's a lot of changes going on. But what I described at Exponential, I won't redo my whole talk here, is that we're in a disrupted, a precarious, because we don't know where it's going to go, but also an opportune time. But Davis, you heard me say at Exponential, church planning has not caught up with the opportunity. We'll get to that in a minute, but let's maybe if you want to take some of these questions and talk about it, we can do that too.
Tell you
Whatever you
what,
want to
do
do,
me a
Dave.
favor here, Ed. There's a question there from Bob Engel, and maybe I
Yeah.
think you kind of put three of them. Why don't you go ahead and read that? And while I take a stroll down memory lane, because Terry Saliba, our executive conference director, chimed in and said, "Yes, when we had the van, we actually went to Ed's house."
No way.
That's what she
Did you
said.
really?
Terry
Terry,
Saliba not lying.
I can see this, Terry. Where was it? Terry, drop in that chat so I can know where it was. Yeah, let me answer Bob's question. The survey of Exponential Research Report targeted only pastors. Modalic. You can tell Bob didn't like the modalic nature of it. I love you, Bob. I've known you for a long time. Yet the two redemptive structures for missions leading to movements include sodalities. Now, do I have to explain sodalic and modalic? Sweet mother of pearl, Engel, what are you doing to me?
And you do.
Is
You
there a
got to you
survey
got to you
plan?
got to do a quick sidebar. Explain that.
Yeah, it has to do with how, well, his question actually explains what it sort of is. So it says, is there a survey being planned for sodalities, mission orgs, RMO, church planning networks? So sodalities are mission, simply put, mission organizations rather than they come alongside churches rather than churches. Most planners are pastoral, just wrong, not wrong, not or bad, or not apostolic, true. Church planning pastors, modalic. How are we identifying Pauline apostolic planters, which he says more sodalic? I get it. That plant maneuver? The answer is, Bob, we're not. So, I mean, just transparently, this is not a survey of mission organizations. It was a survey of church planners. You have rightly identified a lacking piece of the data, but don't be discouraged by that, listeners, because you know what's better than the data you have, data that answers all the questions. You know it's not, we know it's worse than the data you have, not having the data that you have. So the data we have really helps us to understand a lot about where church planning is, but there's a lot more to be explored. But the problem, Bob, is there's really no way to survey sodalic organizations because they all won't respond to a survey where we can do a random phone survey of pastors because we have their phone numbers. But good, I think it's super. He says we need both redemptive structures, whether the individual is male or female. And I'm with you, Bob. It's a great question. Do I just keep going on? Oh, it says we saw you on your bike when you're on your weight loss journey. Terry, that was my first weight loss journey. I lost a bunch of weight and gained it all back. So this is why I never talk about being an expert at weight loss. Over the last 4 years, I've lost over 100 pounds. I got convicted while I was in Hawaii trying to hike Diamond Head. So this is why I humbly hold on. I even have a Facebook group called Fat Pastors, which you might find amusing. I have over 1,000 pastors kind of working together on their weight loss journey. But
Are
I
you
always tell them,
are you still working towards the possible 5K?
I am. I'll tell you, my dad got really sick and died, and it kind of messed up my exercise routine. So I've been working with a personal trainer. And so I told him I need to take off a little bit. But then I've been in Asia for 3 weeks. So, but I'm right now getting back on it. Matter of fact, Easter this weekend, we get back on that. So I'd like to do it. So we'll see. We'll see. But remember, pray. Please do not look to Ed Stetzer for any advice on weight loss. I've gained weight and lost weight and gained weight, lost weight. I'm at the age where I need to lose it and keep it off. All right, Bob Coate wants to talk about Christian nationalism. Just wondering if Christian nationalism somehow influenced the stats. Well, I mean, sure. There are a lot of people who are nervous about some of the more nationalistic sounding Christians, but there's no way to like filter that out. So the stats I presented here tend to be stats of church engagement and involvement. And actually some of them, I got the screen sitting on here, still sharing the screen. But some of them actually, this is the part that I didn't get to. Let me show you a couple things, Bob, because if Christian nationalism, but let me just say, I've written about Christian nationalism in national publications before people were talking about it. And everyone, like, not everyone, a bunch of people got mad at me saying, there's no such thing, you're making it up. And then a bunch of people said, no, actually, we are Christian nationalists and wrote books, et cetera, et cetera. And those same people who told me in some cases it wasn't a thing then said, well, we are that thing. So again, I've expressed my concerns pretty clearly on this. But your question is about how it's impacted the stats. Well, the stats in some ways, the continued narrative decline, but the awareness of Christian nationalism is a relatively new conversation. And let me also say that sometimes the media, I was watching this commentator on MSNBC, and I recognize it's MSNBC. I'm not trying to pick on MSNBC, but it tends to be the most progressive of the major networks. And she got on and said, Christian nationalists actually believe that their rights don't come from government, but they're derived from God Himself. And I was like, yeah, that's actually what the founding documents say. That's literally what what it says. So, Christian, what does Christian nationalism mean? I've written about it in the Dallas Morning News, USA Today, and other places. But to answer your question, so this is some of the data that, I'm looking here and like my religious faith is very important in my life. These are, this is bumped down a little bit, but there's something going on here. This is the chart. I put this chart in the USA Today article when I submitted it. I don't think they are going to publish the chart. They don't publish charts. But I just explained it. But there's something going on. So whether Christian nationalism impacted that or related to that, I think, as someone who believes in religious liberty, that's part of my theological heritage and more. But the data tells us there's something going on, and in part, there's there again. That's literally something's going on. Again, it's again this. By the way, Dave, I tell you that I came up with that phrase that's now in my USA Today article the morning that I was speaking, and I edited this and said something's going on, but something is clearly going on in the data. Look at this. Younger generations are re-engaging with churches. Look at the average churchgoer. They're increasing engagement and involvement here as well. It's really interesting. This is Christian identity. Again, don't as a former pollster, I used to run Lifeway Research. I see stuff like this, and I'm kind of cautious. I'm like, okay, let's see where this goes next year. It might round down some. Anyway,
All right. Okay, hold on. I feel like this is a talk show and you're teasing us because it's kind of like I'm waiting for the commercial break to come back to find out what's going on. You keep saying something's going on. So give us a little something. And I know it may not be in the data, but now speculate with us. Pretend like we're at dinner together and you're going like, I don't know, but tell us that.
that is not Dave Ferguson. I'm the dean of the Talbot School of Theology. I lead people with clarity.
But you also have dinner with people. So we're having dinner.
We're having dinner just with hundreds of our friends.
Right. And they're going like, well, what do you think, Ed? What's your gut telling you?
I think, and this is in the USA Today article, I think that people have realized the failure of the modern experiment and they're looking for something else. And I think, matter of fact, can I quote myself? Is that all right? I probably shouldn't, but I'm going to quote.
We're at dinner. It's fine.
Yeah, this is from the article. Matter of fact, maybe I'll even pull up the article. You can see it beforehand. So no, I probably shouldn't do that. So
Love it.
So here's where I end the article. It says this. It says, I do point out, by the way, that Gen Z women are dropping out of church because it's not all good news. Yes, Gen Z men are coming in higher numbers, but among those who disaffiliate from Gen Z women are significantly higher numbers. So here's what I say. So it's not time to call this a revival, but something is stirring in the data, in the culture. Christians would do well to pay attention, live out their faith, and step into the opportunity to share with others. This is going to be in USA Today. I love that. Secularism for many has been found empty and wanting. The chaos and instability of the last few years has people returning to the age-old questions about where we came from, why the world is so messed up, and where we can find hope. As Christians, we can rejoice in a newfound openness because we have this strange belief about death and life, that resurrection is real in Christ and possible for the church. So that to me, I think if I wouldn't adopt a triumphal spirit about this, because remember, the big story is decline. Yep. But what I want to say is I think that Christians need to, and this is where we didn't see in the data, Dave, we didn't see an explosion of church planting. It's time for an explosion of church planting. You have a welcome, open, receptive culture. it's time to step into church planting at a greater level, work towards that 16% mission. So what I would say is great opportunity here. This is a moment of opportunity. Now, again, Dave, we've been friends a long time. And you actually joke, like you will speak at the Exponential conference and you'll say, "Oh, Ed Stetzer's not here. I'm going to use a statistic. Thank the Lord Ed Stetzer's not here. I'll correct my statistics." Because everyone was making up stats about how bad everything was. And I'm like, stop overreacting to statistics. Well, this is Ed Stetzer, who for 20 years has been telling everyone to kind of calm down. It's a slow decline. It's 1% per year. Stop talking about collapse and all this sort of stuff. And Ed Stetzer saying, I've never seen anything like this in the data. And so for me, man, I would love to see a revival break out. And I think church planning is the evangelistic tool that God uses in ways that are just statistically impactful more than anything else. So that's my exhortation, I think, would be.
That anything else? In this cultural moment, what are the opportunities? I mean, you did name church plans. Is there anything else that comes to mind going like, hey, if there is something going on, like maybe could be going on.
Yeah,
What,
I think
what,
this is a real key.
where do
Oh,
we
sorry.
as church leaders need to really, I don't know, is the right word, capitalize on this cultural moment?
Yeah, I think ultimately your writing in and around about blessing, the table fellowship, the community. Somebody mentioned Alpha in the comments as well. I think things like that, Christianity Explored, there's all kinds of alpha-like things. Alpha is just the most famous and 30 million people around the world. So I think that go engage our neighbors. Like, let's go engage our neighbors and show and share the love of Jesus. I will tell you in particular, I've been, now again, there's the providential circumstance. I happen to be the dean of the school that has the largest apologetics program in the world. So I'm a little biased, but I think what we see when Wesley Huff went on Joe Rogan's podcast, I think the fact that the world is paying attention to apologetics now in a new, fresh way really should get our attention. So,
Mhm.
we're William Lane Craig teaches here with us, and we're doing a summer course with him. And I think people are leaning in towards apologetics in a way because people need a rational defense because they need permission to say this could be plausible, this could be possible, but then ultimately it's the Spirit of God who works in their heart through people who share the good news of the gospel that ultimately changes everything. So I think I see things like church planning, you already mentioned. I like engaging our neighbors through blessed practices or more. Apologetics, I think, growing as an option as well. But again, I think this is where I think it's precarious. There's a lot of crazy in the church right now. It's really not. I mean, it's not going well in many places. And I really want to see discipleship be recentered in what we're doing. Far too many people have been discipled by their cable news choices and their social media. So so I don't know that I think God's giving us an opportunity. I think your church. I hope your church is thriving. I go to Mariners Church. God's doing great things. We are thriving.
We're in a really great season by
Yeah,
God's grace right
yeah,
now.
and I would say that a lot of churches are that are staying focused on the mission, not being caught up, distracted by ideology of the left and the right, but really focused on the good news of the gospel. So anyway,
Good. Why don't let's talk a little bit about the 16% mission and the
yeah,
research there. We got a few minutes left.
yep. Let me fast forward over to that. So
And I'll
so
tell you
so
what,
what
I'm going to
we
give a shout out to Andy, who's our producer. Andy, why don't you look through those questions and pick two or a couple of them that you think kind of we really need to address before we jump off.
Yeah, so remember that much of the research I talked about here was Barna research. I'm a senior fellow with Barna Research, like them for what Barna's doing, but we also love other research companies. Lifeway Research has been doing more church planning research than anybody. I used to lead it, and then they've continued it. They're partnered with us at Exponential. So we did the state of the church planning, and again, what we're looking for. This is part of the Becoming Five Multiplication Study Research Report. I'm assuming that's people can get it online. Dave, how do people get it?
I have a hunch that probably at the end of this, maybe we'll
Yeah,
put up a
no,
link.
someone will drop it in there. Yeah. So we did this 2025 becoming five. Now remember, the five is this idea of five levels of multiplication, right? So subtracting, lots of churches in that, plateauing, lots in that, adding is good. Level four reproducing is great, but level five is greater. And to coin a term, um, so so we were hoping. Well, first of all, you got to remember there was a COVID rebound. There's a COVID bounce back. And so we're kind of past that though. So at this point, when the research, like if you look at church planning in 2020, it was a disaster. Like everyone I met in a school was kicked out. It was a disaster. 2021, a little bit of comeback, but still, depending on where you were, in Chicago, we were still participating in the pandemic in 2021, where Dave and I
Yeah.
were. But in Texas, they kind of didn't participate in the pandemic at all. They've been kissing each other on the mouth for 5 years in a row, and so it was different. So like Chicago church planning looked different than Texas church planning. So now we get to the place where did we see a greater sense of reproducing and a greater sense of multiplying? And the answer is actually no. But being plateaued was not that bad. So 7% of all churches are reproducing. Now again, there's a metric to that. Don't just say, what does that mean? You got to read the metric. The metric actually an algebraic equation. It includes multiple factors, but they place a priority on starting new churches. We're for that. We'd like to get that to 16%, but 7% was up from prior. So 7% of all Protestant churches are level 4 according to the protocol used on this study. Now, the thing we'd really like to see more of is level 5. Well, we want to see more level 4. I should have said it that way. Level 5. So 0% of all Protestant churches are multiplying. Now, 0% doesn't mean zero number. There's some numbers in there. There's some churches that met that qualification. Now, that requires a level of multiplication that is pretty atypical, not that normal. I think, for example, like Dave, I'll put you on spot. I think for sure your church would be a level 4 church. But man, it would be hard for a large church, even all church planning you're doing, to be a level 5 church. And so what does that look like? A lot of times that looks like alternative missional communities. That looks like, it looks like microchurch. It looks like, and we're for those things. I will tell you, it's hard to find those things in a research study because remember, a research study calls people on the phone. These are phone surveys. And that means a church has got to have a phone number. And I don't know, your house church probably doesn't have a phone. So that's part of it as well. So we know that they would be harder to find, but we need to see more, not less of that as well. So the goal is the 16% mission, which is 16% of the churches in the U.S. becoming multiplying churches. And we didn't move forward in that number, but we did stay steady in that number in a very tumultuous and turbulent time. So, I mean, I'm going to take a W on that, but I want to see that's good or great. I want to see greater. And that's part of what I tried to end my talk with was, because Dave, you know that you were very gracious. I did my dad's funeral on the Sunday before Exponential. And you were like, Ed, you don't need to come. Terry was great. Pat was great. And for me, I just did a funeral and I talked about my dad and life and death is real and eternity is long and people need Jesus. And so for me, I wanted to come to do what the writer of Hebrews said, to provoke one another to love and good deeds. So if we could gather 6,000 church planners at Church Planapalooza that we call the Exponential Conference, well, we've got to be advocates for the 350,000 churches in the United States to plant churches that plant churches that plant churches if we're going to see a movement of church planting in the U.S. And that's just the U.S. And we're seeing it around the world, right? Thank God for that. I was in Indonesia, 3 days ago? I was in Indonesia with City to City. But really, if you want to see movements, you can see movements around the world, but they're not here in the West. They're often found in the rest. I want to see a movement here. I'm tired of hearing about movements in Bangladesh. I'm not tired. I love hearing about movements in Bangladesh. I want to hear about movements in the West, not just the rest. And I think that can come in part of it, we're going to have to reconsider our structures and systems, but in part, the 16% mission helps us to get there.
And I told you this, and I'll say it in front of the crowd too. I was really grateful that you were there, and
I was glad to be there.
it meant a lot to me. We weren't expecting it. We wanted you to do what you need to do, but we were grateful to have you there.
Glad to do it.
Hey, segue then. Okay, so we did, because we couldn't grab a hold of all that's happening in the microchurch world, we did do a microchurch survey.
Yeah,
And
right. We haven't talked about that at all,
so-
but we did do a Microsoft survey, which is it's a different statistical method. So people are kind of aware. I didn't do the Microsoft survey. I don't know who did the Microsoft church survey, but I read it. It's so the sample we did is a random sampling of churches with phone numbers who speak English as a first or second language, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we call the other sample is kind of a snowball sampling, where you basically say, do you know somebody? Get them to do this. And they can invite somebody to give it. And people think, well, that's not a real survey. It actually is. It's a real valid survey method. And it seems to be helpful. So anyway, good.
So in addition, we did do a survey, and the survey was with, I think, 20 different networks, over 1,076 microchurches, who over the course of those 3 years said they planted 504 new churches. And I would love to get your take on it. And I understand, and I think it's really important you make the distinction between kind of like here's actual research and here's a survey.
No, let me be clear. That's not what I said. That
Oh,
the
okay.
microchurch survey you did is actual research using a different sampling methodology. It's called
Okay.
a snowball sample, where we did a random sample for library research. That's all. So it's fine. It's good. Don't love your research, brother. Love your research. And you know what's better than having no research? Having that research. And that research with 1,000 respondents in a snowball sample, there's some good content in there. Now, are you going to do a webinar on that? Because I'm not doing a webinar on that. Are you doing a webinar
Well,
on
I'm
that?
going to ask you about it, but and we should do a webinar. You're
Okay,
right.
we should.
So one of the things that was fascinating came back though, of those 1,076 churches in those 20 networks, 50% of them said they were level 4
Yep.
versus the 7% that we have across the board. And then 20% said they were level 5. I mean, what comes to Ed Stetzer's mind when you hear those things?
Yeah. What comes to such mind is that the model of church that we have does not produce significant amounts of reproduction. So if you're listening to this webinar right now and you're in a microchurch, you're like, well, Ed Stetzer, you want to get to 60%? Stop doing it the way Dave Ferguson and Mariners Church does it, but instead start adopting what Wolfgang Simpson wrote about and How Does It Change the World, or Neil Cole, or Tony and Felicity Dale and Simply Church, or lots of others, right? The Tampa Underground. And I think that's a fair statement to make. But the problem is this, Dave, is that we don't find a large scale response to microchurches exploding in among unchurched populations. And that's what we want to see. Too often, and not saying always, but too often, microchurches are the angry white children of evangelical megachurches who want to try something different.
Hmm.
And I want to say that sounded harsher than it. No, I've been around. We don't want that. So what we want is, and we see healthy expressions. I said too often. I didn't say always. I didn't even say the majority of time. I said too often. If you don't agree too often, you haven't been around this context. But too often, that's the case. So what we want to see is the beauty of churches that choose not to expand, but rather to multiply. And so, come with me to San Francisco, where I'll be, just a few weeks, and our Lead the Way tour was at May 1st. And when I'm there, like, where are you going to find space to plant churches that meet in buildings? But micro churches could explode all around there. I was just in downtown Jakarta. They were actually in the building I was in. There were 3 churches meeting inside this high-rise building, different floor. They're on the 4th floor. We're on the 7th floor. They're on the 14th floor. So what I would say is our model of church. I want you to hear the whole sentence. Our model of church, our prevailing model of church, does not lend itself easily to multiplication. Simultaneously, the non-prevailing model of church has not lent itself to significant engagement of unreached and unchurched people, because in our culture, people, if I'm going to go to church, they don't think I'm going to go to a meeting in a home led by my mechanic, say, for example. So again, I'm not saying it's bad. It's a social. I've written on this in Viral Churches. And I call we're in a post-labor industrialized society. I probably shouldn't unpack this whole thing, but the point is that our culture has certain expectations of church, which means irreligious and unchurched people tend to have those expectations of church, which sometimes micro churches do not meet those expectations, and people, they might find them to be fringe or cultish. And again, I'm not saying I do. Let me be crystal clear. I want a movement of microchurches around the world, right? I think planning new churches in the postmodern age, which was the first name of my first book that they retitled Planning Missional Churches, had one of the first chapters in a mainstream publication affirming the microchurch. It wasn't, we didn't call it microchurch at the time, but they were affirming house churches as a methodology. So I'm very much for it, but I think you'd expect more multiplication. What we need to find is more longer form data that tells us it's actually impacted lostness, like it has around the world,
Good. I'll tell you what,
I just probably made some people mad with that answer, but that's not the first time I
I
made
don't
that.
know why. I mean, there was enough disclaimers on it. Why
That's
would
true.
it?
I did a lot of disclaimers because I'm an academic. I got to give disclaimers.
So, okay, so we got a question from Michael here. Maybe this will wrap up with this one, and I think you ought to be able to hit this one out of the ballpark. What's the data supporting the notion of church planning being effective? He says, I've written on this, and it seems to be using your data, and the opposite seems to be the case. Yes, more churches are being planted, but membership is in decline and churches are closing.
Gosh, I don't know what data you would have read that contradicts that. So, but again, we can't ask because it's a written
Right.
question. So I
So,
think
so
maybe
start
the
with the first part.
yeah. So let
What
me let
gives
me
you the
say
notion
maybe
that church planning is effective?
yeah. Well, first of all, let me say that maybe the data is that in the 2014 or 2017 church health study, I said that church plants were becoming less evangelistically effective, which I think is a statistical reality. Less converts per where they were prior. So and I kind of at Exponential, I think I presented that Exponential and said we've got to get back to a greater sense of evangelism. But statistically, new churches reach more people for Christ. Like that's every data source, not just my data source. Every data source says that new churches reach more people for Christ. What I want is new churches to reach more people than they're reaching for Christ. Even though they're reaching more statistically than established churches, I think they can do better and used to do better just 10 years ago. And we've got to not just move sheep to a different pen. We've got to actually find new sheep. And I think ultimately that's what church planting is best at statistically. So it's a famous, thing. Peter Wagner said church planting is the most effective evangelistic methodology under heaven. That's the most famous one. I actually would say it a little differently because I think that sometimes church planting is not done evangelistically, right? I'm reformed and I want to plant a reformed church. And I want to get some reformed people. And so I become the new reformed church, or I'm charismatic and the church here is not charismatic enough. I'm going to start a new church. It's more charismatic. Here's what I'm great. Plant more reformed churches, plant more charismatic churches. Go reach lost people, teach them the Bible as you understand it, and let them become reformed and charismatic if that's your understanding of the scripture. But go find lost people and tell them about Jesus. So that to me is so I do think statistically, like every denomination that's healthy is planting. I mean, the numbers have often been at least 3%, but every denomination that's healthy reaching people is doing it primarily through church planting. Church planting is the most of all the evangelism strategies. It's the most effective statistically, and I think missiologically. I mean, how can I be a missiologist and not love church planting? I wrote my PhD dissertation on the topic, so I care about it deeply.
All right. Hey, Ed, thank you very, very much. Thanks for, yeah, thanks. Well, thanks for your friendship, but also thanks for your partnership, being a part of the Exponential team. Thanks for speaking at Exponential Global. And for those of you, if you're wanting to be a part of our next Exponential conference, remarkably, we've already sold over 4,000. You guys have already bought over 4,000 tickets to next year's Exponential. So it looks like we could sell out, sometime in May. So if you're planning on coming in, we would love, love, love to have you join us. Make sure you get your registration in for that. But also, we'll have two national conferences coming up this fall. One will be in Chicago, right here in the space that I'm in right now. And another one will be out in San Francisco at Three Crosses. Ed will be speaking at both of those. So we're excited to have him, and a really terrific lineup of speakers there, and a whole bunch of different workshops where you get the nuts and bolts of church planning and multiplication, disciple making. So you can sign up for those right now. Would love to have you be a part of those. Ed, thank you very much for doing
I will
this.
see you, sir, at Oxford University in 3 weeks to
Yes, you
lecture
will.
to my class, and to the rest of you, come join us. You can be a student at Wycliffe Hall at Oxford or Talbot School of Theology. Let's study together. Oh,
There
and
you
by the way,
go.
they dropped the link to download these studies as well, so make sure you get those. Remember,
There you go. That's right.
once
Make sure
the
you check those out.
yeah,
We'll
he's
hang
got
on
done.
to just a little bit, so you can go ahead and click those links so you can get those. Those are free. We love to kind of resource our community there, so make sure you get those.
But click now.
Good stuff. That's right. All right. Love you guys. See you, Ed. Thanks,
Just
everybody.
remind you, once the webcast closes, the links go away. Click now, everybody. By the way, thanks to Thrivent for sponsoring this research and for Lifeway Research for doing it. Thanks, Dave, for having me.
You're a better CEO than me.
That's all good. I love everybody. See ya.
See ya.